Hello everybody and welcome to VFR. Today we are here with a really interesting new airplane from Wing42, the Boeing 247D. This is another in our line of early pre-war airplanes that we've been exploring. Similar in vintage to the JU-52. Early to late 1930s passenger airplane by Boeing. A rough contemporary of such airplanes as the Lockheed Electra, and later on the DC-3, although that comes a little bit later. So really cool. It's two big radials, like we're familiar with from our DC-6 experience, and yeah, just a really quality add-on. Really great price for Wing42. You can pick this thing up for like $20 US, and it's a real steal for all the depth you get for that. So we're going to take this on a quick flight. We are here on the ground in Pittsburgh at Allegheny County, KAGC, I think. And we're going to head down to Washington, D.C., DCA. So hopping into the cockpit of the Boeing 247. It is very much old school, kind of all over the place. It's a little funky, and it is interesting. So if you do get it, you will need to look at the manual to make sure that you know what's going on in the cockpit. There are some quirks, particularly like you have to select which engine you're looking at manifold pressure for. So we're looking at the left now, but you have to switch it to the right, and we will get there as we start up the airplane. But the big things with this airplane, again, twin radial engines. You get this nice little checklist. We'll get to that later. Twin big radial engines that you can hand crank, and there's a lot of really neat kind of touches on top of everything else that you get, which help make that whole process come alive. The other thing that is notable of this plane, you're going to be focusing very heavily on old school radio navigation. So that will be something we will explore a little bit more as we go, but we'll basically be tuning into EDF stations and listening for Morse code to determine where exactly we are on the beam as we fly on down. So we'll be flying on down from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C., following an airway based on the 1944 charts that come with this airplane. So I'm going to do a little bit of cockpit prep, and we'll get all situated. One thing that does come with this, which is very handy, that I really love, they have a clipboard in lieu of an iPad with all sorts of things that you can control all the settings through this clipboard, so you just click it and bring it out. This page right here, the performance page, is just fantastic. Having all this right here, one click away from me when I'm taking off, landing, climbing. I need something like this in the DC-6 would be great. So that's all really cool. And then again, it's really like an EFB for that. So we're going to load up, not a full cabin yet, but we might do a fairly full one. And I'm just going to have them top off the fuel tanks too. And maybe add a little cargo. So again, this is really just the interface where you're using this is really well done. And you can control all of your ground crew stuff here with the with these checkboxes. So you see we've got basically the works right now. One other cool thing, if we go to maintenance, we can also completely take apart the engine cowling. So you can have it in various stages of taking apart. You see these parts go to the ground, and you can actually see the engine. So again, just a really, really cool touch. And it feels like way more than your $20 worth, if you're familiar with this. So really worth a look just on that alone. Again, like I always say, these animations are worth the price of admission themselves. You can also open your window. And again, there's all sorts of stuff you can do. But anyway, as I was saying, we're controlling and getting set up. So payload, weight, and balance. There's an artificial ground crew, which will help us get this all situated. So they'll board the passengers, and it will take a little bit of time. So we'll make it so. And this tells you, oh, look, all these guys are going out and working on boarding all the passengers. So while they're doing this, we can talk through our flight plan real quick. All right, so we're bringing you into little nav map here while they get the airplane set up. Essentially, we're doing pretty much a straight shot from Pittsburgh. I have Pittsburgh International, but in reality, we're going to be using Allegheny County. We'll talk a little bit about that, KAGC. We're going to basically fly between these three radio stations. One at Pittsburgh, one at Martinsburg, down here, MR, and then Washington, which is just south of modern-day KDCA. Now, these come basically basically, Wing42 has created a bunch of these stations across the map. When you get this airplane, you get all these radio stations, and they will do their custom. They have custom coded to give you the radio beacons and all of the audible things, the Morse code that we're going to be listening for as we do our flying today. So that comes with the download, and they install, and they give you basically a little nav map database full of all of the different stations that they have added. So again, there's going to be a little bit of dead reckoning and a little bit of using these radio stations to do a little bit of early navigation. Again, we'll talk more about the details as we get into that. But basically, it's going to be fairly straightforward. We're going to keep heading basically 133 all the way south to Washington, D.C. All right, and we are all green now. So they've got all the passengers in wheel chocks. Our engine ladders are here. So we can start getting ready for our start sequence. And now I've done this a couple times, not a ton, but this is one of those that you're going to want to have the manual open while you're doing it. So we're prepping everything. Parking brake, we want that to be set. Parking brake is off. We want to turn that on. Fuel levels. Now to check your fuel gauges, you got to pull these fuel quantity gauges a little bit. And all I'm looking, we should have full tanks, roughly 130 something gallons, 70 gallons in the aux tank. So that all seems about right for us. And again, like the engines, you can switch this lever to look at different engine parameters. You switch this to look at different fuel parameters. Now we are going to start the right engine. So if I mess with our wobble pump, which is this lever down here, you should see the fuel pressure go. We can just turn it to right, because that's the engine we're going to start with. And we want to kind of get this needle here to go to about 5. I do not have realistic engine start set up because this is like the second time I've flown this plane. But there is a realistic engine start setting that basically just adds a lot of probability to the calculations. It adds a lot more behind the scenes of will your engine start or not. So our engine is cold, so we do need to prime it. So primer, we are going to open the main valve. So if this is off, we need to turn it to on. And then I left this cockpit in a bit of a mess, I'm finding. And then we're going to select the right engine here and use the primer handle, which is right here, and give it 1, 2, 3 good pumps. Now our master ignition switch, we want to make sure that's pushed in. And our magnetos for the right engine can go to both. Next up, our props full forward, mixture full rich, as usual for these kinds of things. And then we're going to open up the throttles just a little bit. Make sure we have our parking brake on, and we are now ready to go. So going back out here, we can get ready for our engine start. Basically, to get the engine started, someone has to crank it. You may have seen this if you watched old airplanes start up. But in this airplane, they actually give you the chance to do it yourself. Now let's see if I remember what the bindings are. So we're in the right engine here. Essentially, do I have to do that from inside the cockpit? We need to attach the starter crank. So our mechanic's going to attach the starter crank. And then we'll try and go do it outside while you can do it manually yourself, or you can click wind up flywheel here. We're going to go out and do it manually on this engine just for fun. And I'm looking at the wrong engine too. So we really want to put it out here. And then the default, these are all mapped to instrument views, basically, these engine views. So this is Control F7 and Control F6 for the other engine. So you can see the starter crank there. Now we've got one here. So now we're just going to really hold it down and listen to it as we crank. And once we have a good RPM going, we can pull the clutch, and we have an engine started. It's kind of terrifying, but that is how it's done. Make sure we have life, we've got fuel pressure. Of course, we need to switch to the other engine to see a right engine, and we can see that the manifold pressure is not the atmosphere, which is all I'm looking for. So really interesting, really unique. Now, if you want to do it automatedly, you can do that too by clicking wind up flywheel, and now the mechanic's going to get out there and start cranking. You can see that little handle cranking. And then again, we need to turn on fuel for both and use our wobble pump to keep the fuel pressure around 4 to 5. So keeping that there. And then once you hear a good whir, you can mesh flywheel. And that hasn't started because I'm not turning on the magnetos. So magnetos, wobble pump, and then wind up flywheel. Again, imperfect, but you get the hang of it after a while. Just make sure all the switches are in the right places. The right switches, that's not very helpful. The right switches being making sure you have actual fuel going in somehow, fuel going into the engine you want to start. You have fuel pressure around 4 to 5, magnetos to both, and your ignition is pushed in. Let's bring this back out. He'll keep whirring for a while, but that's flywheel meshed. And I do need to get rid of since we manually started this one, we can get rid of the ladder ourselves. And so that's it. It's not rocket science, but it is a little bit finicky, and it's a little fun. It's just a little bit different from anything else that I've done. All right, so we're going to taxi out to runway 13. We have everything set up. Get rid of the wheel chocks. We'll taxi out to the left. Wind's about 6 knots out in that direction. We will taxi out to the left, and when we get up in the air, we'll talk a little bit about what we're listening for in the radio range navigation. Now, I'm not doing a very good job of setting the stage for this flight. There's a lot of neat little historical things going on here. We're in a Boeing 247. We'll talk a little bit more about the airplane as we go. We are in a Pennsylvania Central Airlines livery today. This comes with the base package that they give you. This is an interesting airline. It basically served Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. It will eventually become Capital Airways, which is then absorbed into United. But Capital was another big major airline of the day, and one that flew another favorite of ours that's similar, the DC-6. The other thing, we're here at Allegheny. Now, you might be saying, well, Pittsburgh has a big international airport, Cape Pitt. But at the time, contemporarily to this airplane, Cape Pitt hadn't been built yet. So Pittsburgh International, the modern one, was built in 1951. We're flying into KDCA, which is also a bit of an anachronism, although it's close enough. So Allegheny County would have been the airport you flew into in the 30s. It was one of the bigger airports actually in the U.S. at the time. This airport. So it is a very historic airport. Now DCA is not historical, but it's kind of close enough. The story of Washington airports in that area, there were basically two, Hoover Field and Washington Airport. They merged to create this kind of safety hazard airport with a amusement park around it, a public swimming pool. People would cross the runway all the time. It was dangerous. They built DCA right around the World War II time frame. So DCA is not technically accurate for what you would be flying into DC at this time in the 1930s, but it's close enough. Basically, the old airport would be where the Pentagon is now, so we'll see that. It's really right next door. So without any more talking, let's go ahead, throttle up, make sure we still have 2 engines, which is always helpful, and get out onto the runway. Now, this airplane is not the easiest to control on the ground. Rudder pedals with toe brakes are really going to help you here, because it does turn a little and then a lot. So using wheel brakes is very helpful. I also like to keep some power in. My engines will cut out if I turn the throttles all the way back to idle and I'm not careful. All right, so takeoff is going to be fairly straightforward. It's a lot like our DC-6. We're going to basically go, and this is why I love it. I forget the number, but it's 36 inches of manifold pressure. So let's bring up our takeoff, 36 inches of manifold pressure, about 2200 RPM, maximum of 5 minutes at that power setting. After that, we'll go to 32 inches, 2100 RPM for the climb out. Again, love having that right there. So we're going to bring our throttle all the way forward. Now 31 inches, 36 inches of manifold pressure should be just about to the end of the white there. So we're going to bring that all the way forward and just keep an eye on that needle. And then we're going to fly out, and we're going to rotate at about 90 miles per hour. But we'll just kind of, again, just like the DC-6, very gently fly out. So that's 80 miles an hour now. And at 90, it should just basically start to fly. And away we go. So our way gear can come up. And we'll bring the power back, again, just a little bit to 32 inches of manifold pressure. And next, we're going to try and go to a heading of 132. 132. And we'll turn a little bit right here. Off the runway. And climb up to a cruising altitude. We'll aim for about 10,000 feet for now. So essentially, we're just going to get established. We don't have any GPS or anything fancy in this airplane. It's just our radio nav and a stopwatch if you want to use a stopwatch. So you can do dead reckoning, you can do all that old school stuff, but again, no GPS on board. If you do want to use one, if you're feeling overwhelmed by that, I do have the GTN 750 still installed here at the toolbar that we can pop out if we get really lost, and little nav maps also were looking out for me. So slightly embarrassing. I didn't have the battery on, so that red knob here. I'll turn the battery on. If you don't have the battery on, everything will work mostly fine, but your landing gear won't come up, which is an important thing. Again, I don't claim to be an expert in the 247. This is very much a, hey, this is kind of cool. Let's see where this takes us. It's kind of flight. All right, so we are climbing out now here of Allegheny. We'll get into the clouds maybe a little bit here, but essentially we're going to set up the radio range navigation now. So we're going to come up here to our top thing here, the top radio unit, I guess we can call it. And we're looking for Pittsburgh, which is going to be a frequency of 254. So again, it's very much, we're going to rotate this knob to get to 25. And I got to go up to another band. It's all very, it feels very analog. So 254, that's 255. I'm using the mouse wheel to do big adjustments and then little adjustments with just clicking and dragging. Make sure we're still going the right way. We are not, so let's bring it back. And again, trim will help you get situated while you fiddle with it. Back up to the top here. Now, basically everything will turn up the volume, turn power on, and then power on the radio here. So we're now getting Morse code. This is what we're listening to. And we're getting a dot and a dash. Now, if I check my notes, long short is N, short long is A. And basically that tells you, it's a little complicated, it tells you where you are in a quadrant relative to the station. So this is telling us that we are in a quadrant of the station. I'll put up a diagram that shows a little bit better on the screen in post. But essentially we're flying away from Pittsburgh, and so we should hear A if we are, so that means we're off a little bit to the left of the course we were looking for. Again, we're going to just fly 133 as best as we can. But that just gives us a sense of where we are in space. Now, if we turn right, we should, if we head south enough, we should get to a point where we hit, where we start hearing long, then short. At that point, you know where you've gone kind of south of the outbound track, or the inbound track in this case is 299. So listen here, you can see we're getting into the soup a little bit, but listen to how the sound we're hearing is changing. That means we're getting close to the beam that radio station is programmed to fly out. Now, this would be a heading of 299 inbound or 119 outbound. So really, we actually want to be a little bit away from that, but we're just about coming up to it now. That's what it's telling us. And from there, we can kind of deduce, if we keep going this direction, keep heading to the south, we should basically go to a point where we're hearing ends. And that tells us, hey, we're south of that line. It is imperfect. There's a reason they came up with some of these other nav aids. So the big, you have your box up here. I have a custom view bound to this. And then, I like to hit the power off. You can also turn the volume down if it's getting annoying. But we're basically, we'll check in on that a little bit. As long as the beam's kind of, I'm not an expert in this, but as long as I'm hearing a lot of sound, if we're hearing both N's and A's, and we're heading in generally 132, we're going to be fine. Pittsburgh doesn't track outbound exactly on the heading we need to go. So we'll be doing a little bit of dead reckoning out to Martinsburg, but we'll still be able to judge where we are based on the sounds, in theory. All right, so this is now classic instrument flying. Just a little, you have to really trust yourself. Or you can have a little nav map up too, which is what I'm doing for this flight. Unashamedly, I am not an expert in any of this kind of flying. So definitely something, though, that's really fun to try and figure out. See how well you can do this kind of navigation with really primitive nav aids in these kinds of conditions. It is really quite it'll make you a better aviator, I'm sure. So we're watching the compass. We're listening a little bit. Again, I just kind of want to hear it fuzzy, and we know we're going mostly the right direction. If I start hearing N or A, I know I'm drifting either to the south or to the north. So just as a quick demonstration, if it's not already clear as mud, we're now hearing a little bit of N, long then short. That means I'm kind of south of the beacon. Or south of the beam, I should say. So if you hear them close together, it sounds like just one tone. You're riding the beam. We're kind of south of it right now. We're off to the right of it, heading outbound. It's a little confusing, but the concept is simple enough. It's just the application will take a little bit of practice for you to, I think, get use it effectively. So we're now level about 10,000 feet. This is very hands-on, so no autopilot. We're basically just trimming out to make sure that we're staying basically 133 or 130 heading that way. The next thing we need to start thinking about is tuning in our next radio station. And I've written them all out in a document because I can't remember all of it, but that's going to be the Martinsburg station on 209, so 209. And make sure I'm not climbing out crazy either. There's a lot of plates that you're spinning in an airplane like this. It is quite. I think it's a good experience for a lot of folks. See, we're gaining a lot of altitude. I want to actually stay level, but this is true instrument flying. I'm hoping. I know it'll get a little better by the time we get to DCA. All right, so weather has improved a little bit over Pennsylvania. We're about a little bit. We're pretty close to the Maryland line here, so we're going to be continuing to cruise over southern Pennsylvania for a little bit. Now, we are listening to a new radio station. That is the Buckstown station on 359, and basically, we're due south of that one. It's not on our flight plan, but really, I just want to hear it change from one sound to the other, and we know we've passed it. It will have a beam heading south that we will eventually... It should all run together, and then we'll pass it. So that just tells us, gut check, we're south of Buckstown like we think. So this radio range navigation system is really interesting. It's one of the things that helps spur radio IFR and commercial airline travel in the U.S. in the 1930s, in this early period of commercial aviation. Essentially, it's a network of radio transmitters, not unlike modern VOR stations today, but relatively unique to the U.S. The system was not as widespread elsewhere. They did have some in Europe, but again, there's a lot in the U.S. that are modeled through this add-on. And it's really basically defines a bunch of predetermined airways based on these radio frequencies. And that was the backbone of these different air travel routes, just like your low IFR chart and your high IFR chart in SkyVector today. It's just all based on these radio frequencies. Now, obviously, a lot of development happens after that. World War II is a huge push of technological development that really makes this plane look antiquated even 5 or 6 years later. 1939, it's a relatively modern plane. After that, it's out the window. But the Boeing 247, again, we talked a little bit about it. Its contemporaries are things like the Lockheed Electra or the Douglas DC-2 and DC-3. DC-3 starts in the 1940s, so it's kind of towards the end. But basically, this airplane's developed and launched in 1933, and it will fly and serve in commercial service in the States and Europe up to World War II. There are not that many built, only like 75. Most of them serving with airlines like United or Pennsylvania Central Airlines and stuff like that. And then again, once World War II starts, mostly the Army and other allied nations will put a couple of these into service. Some of them, I think, with Canada. Some of them are used to test different, used as test platforms for different weapon systems. But ultimately, it's beat out by things like the DC-3, which really becomes a hugely widespread. For reference, they built 8,000 Douglas DC-3s and only 75 of these airplanes. So again, it's maybe it's not the dominant design that won out the times. It was outsold by the Electra and the Douglas products. But still, it's an important step in the lineage of any Boeing aircraft. What's going to come after this is the Boeing 307, I believe, and eventually, Boeing's going to develop into the Super Fortress and those other wartime airplanes, which share a great deal of technological knowledge with this airplane. Those wartime Boeing airplanes eventually grow into the 737, 757, the 747 that we see today, the Dreamliner, 787. So it's a cool piece of aviation history, and it is a really cool period piece, a lot like the Stagger Wing. It's one of those planes that is, it's really it comes at a really interesting time in aviation history in the U.S. And so here, we've got the constant sound here. You see how that's changed? That's telling me that we are on the beam south of Buckstown, and now it's gone over to, well, now it's doing its station identification in Morse code, but that's just telling me, okay, we are actually south of Buckstown. That's not me making that up. Now, of course, we could also be way off to the north, but that would actually flip the other way, so we'd expect to go from A to N, not N to A. So again, it's clear as mud, and that's really the fun of this. So briefly, we're still waiting on the Martinsburg radio station to come in on 209. But I'm asking myself at each point in this flight, what do I expect to hear based on where I am? We're traveling again about 130 heading. We're going to be coming in from the relatively from the northeast. Martinsburg has a couple beams, basically 1093 and to 207. We should be hearing N. And then between 093 and 027, we should be hearing A. So as we come up on it from the east, we want to hear an N, a long and then a short, because again, we should be a little bit northeast of it. Now, if we really want to, we get lost, we can ride the beam in, so we can go turn to the right, basically, hunt for 093 and fly into Martinsburg. I'm relatively confident we're heading in generally the right way, but if we were concerned, that's something we could do. It's a tool in our toolbox. All right, so we have Martinsburg. Now, this is a medium range station. I don't know what exactly those breakdowns are, but those breakdowns are listed somewhere. How far out you can see it. But we are getting a long and then a short. So we're getting an N, which I believe is what we want. Again, if you don't get all this range radios, if you don't get all this radio range, and again, if you don't get all this radio range stuff right away, that's not to be held against you. This is something that will take practice to actually get right. I'm not doing this right at all. I'm just kind of guesstimating where I'm at and also checking with a little nav map. No shame in that for a second or third flight. If you really are interested in this kind of stuff, you can go really deep into this kind of navigation. And this airplane is a great platform for that. It's not something that I am doing right now, nor do I really do a whole heck of a lot. It's really just fun to play around with for me. So that's my level. Again, you can approach this. This is an add-on deep enough for you to approach it at a much deeper level, if that's something that really interests you. All right, so if you hear it going full constant tone right now, that's because we are basically on the beam now. So this 093, I believe is what it is, into Martinsburg. That's what we're basically on. And we're just going to try and follow this in. Now, if you look at little nav map, I haven't been trying to spoil it, but basically, magenta line's where we want to be. We're off a little bit to the south of our line, and so that's why it's basically coming in and showing us that different sound. If we just keep on going, we can fly basically as well as we can towards that, and that'll get us closer to our back on our airway. But essentially, we could also just keep going and know that once it flips, we would be now kind of past that radio, but it would be a little confusing. So we're going to follow it in, get reestablished online, and that will make it a lot easier for us to go into DC, because again, we should be right on course as we come into DC. The DC radial is on, what, 332. Now again, a good pilot doing this kind of radio range navigation, we can turn this down a little bit. A good pilot doing this radio range navigation wouldn't get that far off course, maybe. Well, some of them did. Yeah, but again, practice. And I'm also just checking little nav maps so I don't get completely off base, because that can get real demoralizing. I also know this area fairly well from the air, so I know generally which way we're going, and if we get kind of in the area, basically once we hit water, we can either decide to go left or right, and we have a decent chance of picking the right direction. But either way, the point is, this takes practice and is not an easy thing to really wrap your mind around, especially if you've never done anything quite like it. The other important thing to keep in mind, if you are in fact feeling discouraged with how it's going for you doing radio range navigation, is that they didn't stop here as the pinnacle of navigation technology, especially for instruments, and there's a reason for that, and that's because people got lost. So they did keep developing this into more user-friendly, much more user-friendly tools. So again, it's hard, it's kind of supposed to be. It's not the most intuitive thing in the world, but it does work if you study it and know how it all works as a pilot. So that can be very satisfying. All right, so visually I know we're kind of over Martinsburg now. Basically, we're going to make a right-hand turn, get back on that 133134, and start tuning in Washington, which is going to be on 332. So if we come up to the top panel here, we'll turn the power off for now. I think we have to go up to band 2. Basically, this flips through all the different bands you can use. Kilocycles is the same idea as kilohertz. And then we need to go all the way up to 332. So that's, oops, too far. And then just, again, short click and drag for 331, and here's 332. It's already there. We'll turn power on. And that's a good sign. We've already got a signal. We've got a constant tone, which means we're basically on the, we're riding the beam in. So we just want to keep this tone in our ears. We don't want to hear a dot dash or a dash dot. We want to keep hearing constant tone. The other important thing to understand is if we get off to the right, we should hear an A. If we get off to the left, we should hear an N. So if we are hearing long then short, we need to go right. If we're hearing short then long, we need to go left. Clear as mud? All right. So one more thing as we sit in the passenger window. You may hear it change. Every minute it's going to play its station identifier. In our case, Washington, we're flying inbound, we should be looking for a Morse code rendition of WA. So when it stops beeping the constant tone and goes into a bunch of other beeps, that's Morse code for what station you're listening to. All right, so we are going to begin our descent just about now. We could start maybe a little bit earlier. I don't have it really well tuned out. Now, the discerning among you This should start to look familiar because this is an approach we've flown a number of times, but we are getting close now to the DC area. And essentially what we're going to do, we're going to verify to ourselves we're still on the right path. We are roughly. So basically we are going to fly the river visual for DCA, and yeah, we'll descend down to about 3,000 feet before we get there. But basically, Potomac River is off to our left here. Washington Dulles is out this way, off to just off our nose to the right. Leesburg Airport is off below us here. So we're getting into the area. We're probably 30, 40 miles away. We'll descend down to, again, about 3,000 feet. Again, I'm pulling manifold pressure. You don't want to go all the way back on your power. We want to leave some power in because it's a big radial. And again, just slow and gentle manipulation of the throttle is all we're really going for. So we're going to descend on into DC. We will land this thing. We'll try and fly the river visual, more or less. We'll land this thing up. And yeah, that'll be it for this rather exploratory flight. Alright, so we are roughly now over where the modern waypoint Berge would be, and that would kind of be your traditional starting point of the river visual. Again, kind of ahistorical. The airport we would be going into would be Washington Hoover Airport, which was, again, those two airports wearing a trench coat pretending to be one dangerous airport. And also this would kind of predate a lot of the noise restrictions and air traffic restrictions in Washington. That said, we're going to fly the river visual because it's cool and it's fun. And it's always fun to fly it in a different airplane. Now, this airplane, our big thing is we shouldn't have a problem bleeding speed. We're down around 110 miles per hour now. Whenever we're ready, we'll put our gear down and basically just try and touch it down, 3-point landing. That's really all there is to it. Again, we're going to be trying to approach between I'm going to aim for 90 miles per hour. It'll probably be closer to 80 as we come on down. But the big thing now is it just does not like to lose altitude. These airplanes of this period, the Boeing 247, we also see it with the Junkers, the Ju-52, and the C-47, or the DC-3. They turned a lot of those into gliders. These airplanes are kind of built naturally to glide. You have these big wings. They're relatively lightweight. So, again, you should have plenty of lift, and you can get pretty slow, and it's not a huge problem. So just managing that will be the key. And again, this is just going to be kind of a rough river visual. I don't have the chart up in front of me, but we're just gonna fly it on in. So again, we're just gonna keep it coming downhill. We're gonna pass the reservoir, and basically as we're past that, I'll put the gear down. If you're interested in where Washington Hoover Field was, roughly, again, big building right off our nose, just before that, the runway at DCA. Pentagon, again, roughly where that kind of collection of airfields was. And, yeah, so we're passing the reservoir now. It's starting to eat itself. And then again, around Roosevelt Island out here, we kind of want to be at 900 feet, so we're looking all right. I should really make a scenery to fix that or something. It shouldn't be that hard. Looks me every time we do the river visual. All right. Coming left now. We can now entertain the idea of landing. Bringing the gear down. I haven't exactly figured out the buttons with the gear. It basically has an up and down and a neutral position that aids in the emergency retract functionality of it. But gear is coming out now, and we'll have to give it a little bit of power to maintain speed. And the other thing is you need relatively high throttle to get that manifold pressure. I mean, maybe it's obvious to some, but you do have to give it a lot of throttle travel. here's a right-hand turn. We're a little low, but that's all right. Passing the Lincoln Memorial now. I'm seeing all red at DCA, so again, we're a little low, but that's okay. And again, I've got a good amount of power, and we're at about 90-ish knots, 100 knots, 95 knots, or 95 miles an hour, I should say. Which will work. The airplane kind of likes to sit in the 80s. If you let it go slower, you will, but it'll get a little hair-raising on approach, I find. It's right here, wants to slow down on me, so let's give it some more power. Just trying to keep that last little bit of altitude as I don't have a good visual. Start into our turn. Alright, so now we're a bit high. But that is alright. Now, I do find that on landing, this airplane feels pretty good. Again, I haven't done a whole lot of landings, but certainly not as floaty as the Unkers. And me being a fine connoisseur of flight models. So here's where it gets a little tricky. We're dipping below into the 70s now, 70 miles an hour. It'll start to want to fall out of the sky a little bit. But we should have just enough to keep it. And you look at our vertical speed, we're really not descending that quickly. We're still at like 100 feet per minute, even though it feels a lot more drastic. So throttling back, and we'll just kind of put it in a nice 3-point attitude. There's touchdown. And here we are. So welcome to Washington, D.C. here. We are going to taxi off to the right over to some of these remote stands and get everybody off this plane. Oops. So again, another embarrassing one. If you bring the throttle back all the way to idle and hold it there too long, your engines will shut off. We will we'll tow ourselves forward a little bit, get out of the way. But just be warned, that will happen. All right, so we're here on the ground at DCA. I used pushback, toolbar pushback to get us out of the danger zone. We've unloaded the passengers now. Bottom line, I think Wing42's done a really great job with this plane, Boeing 247D. It's a steal at $20 for the depth you get. It has really nice systems. The airplane feels really dynamic. It feels unique to fly. It's kind of sluggish, especially in roll with these big wings. But yeah, great engine sounds. I really enjoy that. I enjoy the funky engine startup. There's just a lot to dig into. Plus, they just finished unloading. You have these automated ground crew, which again, I think this is one of the best EFBs, quote unquote, that I've seen in one of these planes. I think this is really, really top notch, well done stuff. I love this. I wish more EFBs were like this. And just the interaction with the ground crew too. Again, all that sorts of stuff. This funky control layout with all of these different knobs and switches. It's something so silly having to switch which engine parameters you're actually looking at instead of having all the gauges. The point is, this airplane is really very much a piece of history, a piece of its time. There's a lot of reasons we don't do things the way we did it on this airplane anymore. And again, on top of all this, Wing42 basically adds a whole system of navigation rebuilt, from the ground up, to implement those radio range navigation signals, which is a whole other discipline of flying. If you want to fly instrument in this kind of thing, it's just, again, it's a huge package for $20. You can't beat it. This was one of those, I saw the things it came with and I was, wow, that's really good. So love it. Love this airplane. Really cool. We will probably see this again. You may be convinced why you should fly it at some point in the near future. But definitely cool. I wanted to take this out on a trip and just kind of show off what all this is doing. Because again, I think this is a really great trend in flight sim. Sometimes this is a hobby where you don't always get the most bang for your buck. But this is definitely a huge exception. And Wing42 deserves a huge round of applause for all that. This would be a really great add-on at twice the price. So that was fun. A lot of fun to be had in this plane. Thanks for watching, everybody. I know this has probably been a long video, but yeah, clear as mud, I hope. And this has been really fun. So thanks for watching. This has been VFR. Take it easy, y'all.